everyone, welcome back to another amazing day of learning Photoshop. Today we're going to look into how to use adjustment layers in Photoshop. But before we head into Photoshop, I want to clarify a little bit how to use Adobe Bridge because I think you might will all find it really useful. I'm not sure if you have used it before because you can use it basically with any of the Adobe softwares. It's just a bridge, hence the name of how to connect your files to different platforms of Adobe. Right now I'm looking at a folder, and one thing I want to clarify is that you're not really opening files into a software. Okay, Bridge behaves in the same way that you like Finder will behave on a Mac, that you're just looking at your contents in your folders or your hard drive, and it's just showing them to you in a different and better way, so that way you can see clear. You can also see them big. You can put ratings on them. So I'm going to show you some of that stuff, so that way you can use it for your own work. So the first thing is, I have this folder right here that shows some contents. Your view might be different. Okay, when you're in Adobe Bridge, on the top right here, there are different types of workspaces. So if I go to Essentials, it will look like that. If I go to Libraries, it will look like that. So it basically changes. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot modify how these look. They're basically organic. You can change them in any way you want. I'm not going to go over all of these. I'm just going to show you what you're going to use for now, so you can see. The one that I like the most is like light table. And the reason is because it's basically like looking like film when you're putting it in the light table and you get to see all your little thumbnails of your pictures. So for now, the main reason we're going to use Bridge is basically to look through your files so you can put ratings. So you can basically assess what are the best images. Okay, so you can go to those images and then open those in Photoshop. Okay, there are a couple of ways that you can change how you're looking at them. One of them is at the bottom of the viewer right here. You have a slider where you can slide the thumbnails to make them bigger, okay, or you can make them smaller. I usually like to have them a little bit smaller because I actually look at them in full screen. So I want to make sure I can see most of them. If I have like hundreds of pictures, then it doesn't really matter, but I like to see them about this size so I can see what it is, but I don't need to see all the detail because I'm going to make it bigger in a little bit. So I was talking about how organic this is. Like you can pull windows from the side. You can go here to window, and for example, if I want to see like the filter panel, and okay, you check that, and then that will come up. Okay, you can see your favorites, filter. So you have different options that you can basically pull out. Another one that I use a lot is like labels, so that way I can put ratings and stuff like that. But you can see that you have different options right here. Okay, so that's going to make it really helpful later on if you start diving a little bit deeper into it. So for now, the one thing that I want you to be doing is basically sorting your files. So I'm going to pull this out because I'm just going to show you shortcuts so that way you don't get distracted with the different panels. So the first thing that I just want to show you is how do you see the image big? Okay, so you click on the first one. Doesn't really matter which one you click. You can click on this one and you can hit spacebar and it will show you that picture big, right? If it is big. So that's basically how you see the images bigger. You just hit spacebar and it shows them bigger. There's some of them that are web files, so they're a little bit smaller, but the ones that are big, like this one, it will show you the full screen image displayed. Okay, so that's basically it. So you just go through them so you can look at your pictures bigger and you can see which one you want to use. The reason why I like this way more than looking at your files on Finder is because once you find the one that you like, you can add a star. Okay, so I'm going to show you the way that I edit my pictures when I'm looking through files. Right now, this is just a random group of images, but let's assume I'm shooting, right? And then I have to pick one from like a photo shoot that I did. So what you do is you go to the first one and you start going through them, and then you go like, what, I think I can work with this one, and you put 1 in your keyboard. So once I press 1, I don't know if you notice on the bottom left, there's a little icon that popped up and it has 1 star. If I press 2, you'll see now it has 2 stars. If I press 3, 4, and 5, okay? And you have also options to put labels. So if you go 6, it will be red. Then if you press 7, it will be yellow. If I press 8, it will be green. Okay, so you have different options, and 9 is blue. If you press 0, it goes back to 0 stars. Okay, so that's basically one thing that you can do. You can add stars and you can add labels of color. On the top of the screen here, you have labels, so you can, put no label if you want. And you can also do it that way if you go to label and just do it right here. But I think it's better if you just learn the shortcut. It's really simple. Now, there's a catch. If you hit spacebar and you're looking at the image on full screen, you can just press the number, okay? So just press 2, it will do 2 stars. If you press 1, it will do 1 star. But if you are on this thumbnail view, if you hit the 1 for 1 star, it will not do that, okay? You have to press Command 1, okay? And then it will add a star, or Command 3, and it will add 3 stars, okay? So I'm going to do Command 0 to take them away. Okay, so that's what all we want to do for now. It's just basically be able to organize your files and make sure that you know how to pick the ones that you want to work with. That's one thing I wanted to show you really quickly today, because it's going to be really helpful when you're taking tons of pictures and you're putting them in a folder. Then you have to look through them to select the best ones, or the ones that you want to use in Photoshop. So the way that I keep doing this is I go around and I start putting the stars, on the ones that I want to work with. Let's say I want to do that one 1 star. Let's say I want this one 1 star, this one 1 star, and that one 1 star. And I'm going to put that one 1 star. Okay, so let's say I got already, all these ones that have a star. So the next thing I want to do is just look at those that have 1 star. Okay, and one of the things that you could do, if I pull this out, okay, you can see that I pulled this from the side. There is one panel that's called filter. If you don't see it, you have to go to window and make sure that the filter panel has a check mark. Okay, if it has a check mark, then you're good. And then once you have that check mark, you'll be able to see this rating. If you don't see the little stars right here, it might be like that. So you just have to make sure that you expand it, and you'll see all the ratings that you have. So now if I click this one, it was only going to show me the ones that have 1 star. Okay, so what I do is I go back to the 1 stars and I hit spacebar. And then I look through them again and I go like, you know what? I think that one is a 2 star. This one is a 2 star. This one is a 2 star. And this one is a 2 star. Okay. Then I press spacebar again to get out of it. Now I don't see them. And you're wondering why, right? Because we're only looking at the ones that have 1 star. So I can uncheck that. Check the 2 stars. Okay. So now I have right here the group that have 2 star. So this is what I keep doing, right? I keep editing down. So that's what we call, you're editing down to your best one. So I go through the 2 and then I put the ones that are 3 stars. And then I look at the 3 stars and then I add the one that has 4 star. And then I go to that all the way till I get to 5 stars. And that should ideally take you to like a couple of pictures or 1. Okay. So you keep editing down all the way down to your favorite picture. So I want you to get in the habit of doing that, because remember, when we go to Photoshop, you want to start with the best image you can. That's the goal here. We want to go to Photoshop with the best image. You don't want to be fixing everything in Photoshop or randomly grabbing a picture and then taking it there and realizing that it's not, it's not good or it's blurry, when you could have prevented that by looking at the files carefully and selecting the best one. Okay. So that's one thing I wanted to go over to make sure that you know how to edit. Right now, I'm going to show them all. And I'm going to start with this one right here. I'm going to close this window, and later on I will show you more, tricks that you can do on Bridge. But right now, I think that's one of the most useful things that I do on Bridge. I basically live in Bridge, looking at my files here and rating them, organizing them. You can put labels on them. You can put keywords. But for now, I think just a matter of editing down is one of the best things that you can learn, how to organize your files. Okay. And make sure that you select your best ones. Okay. So now we're going to go to Photoshop. Okay, sorry for the intro at Bridge, but right now I think that will be helpful as you go forward. So the next thing is we're going to open this file. And remember, that's the cool thing about using Bridge. If you just double click here, automatically it's going to open your file in Photoshop. Okay, so that's one of the other reasons why I like Bridge too. It's just like one less thing that I have to do, like drag it or go to Photoshop and then go to File, Open. So a lot more seamless, the transition. So I'm going to first reset my workspace. If you forgot how to do that, there's different workspaces. For example, we have photography here. And if you see that some of the windows stick out, you can basically reset photography and it will go back to the original state. I actually have a workspace that I like, that I kind of like simplified it a little bit, which is this one right here. I'm going to reset it also. Okay. And the reason I use this workspace, there's nothing fancy about it. It's just that I want you to see the history so you can see the steps that I'm doing. Okay, so that way, in case you get lost, you can look at the history. The layers is obviously one of the first things that we're always going to be using. So I want it right there. And the adjustments panel, which we're going to live in also. I'm actually going to pull this out so you guys can see it really well, because I'm going to start explaining how we're going to do this. So you already know how to work with layers, I'm assuming, right? You have done that before. And you probably have played a little bit even with adjustments, okay? So just bear with me if you know already some of these, but I'm just going to walk you through it, okay? One thing I want to point out, look at the layers panel. Right now we have one layer right here, which is the image, and that's our background image, okay? And it's locked. And one of the first thing that you do is when you open an image is you have to basically adjust it, right? Or edit your image. And our adjustments are going to be really, really helpful, okay? And the adjustments and the way that they work is that they're non-destructive. They basically are not editing the actual image when you see it on the screen, even though you see that it looks like it's editing that, but they live in a separate layer, which is going to be above your image, okay? So for example, right here, this first row right here are adjustments that deal with contrast or density. The ones in the middle are mostly like colors and, that deal with color or saturation or color effects. And then we have effects at the bottom. Okay. So if you think about this, in three rows, think about like, how it looks, levels, how the contrast density are the top, color, and then effects. Okay. So that should simplify it a little bit for you. The first one is really basic. I'm going to go over all of them, or not all of them, actually, most of them. But it's going to be very briefly, okay, because I'm going to emphasize the ones that I feel like they work the best, okay? So brightness and contrast is super simple, okay? Every time you click on one of these, on the adjustments, two things are going to happen. One, you're going to get a layer above your image, and that's going to be the one that you're going to be editing. And then this properties panel is going to open up. Okay, because it's assuming like, oh, you added that, so you want to edit it. So this panel right here in the properties is basically the edits that you do on this layer that will affect your image that's underneath. The way that Photoshop works is whatever's on the top is covering what's on the bottom. When you deal with adjustments, those adjustments are on the top effects of whatever's underneath. Okay, so right now, because this adjustment right here is above this image, whatever I do here will affect how this layer will look. If I had this image copied on top of this, it will not affect it, right? Because it will be above it. Okay, the image will cover this. So that's a hierarchy that you have to understand when you're working on layers. You have to understand that whatever's on the top will either cover, okay, if it's an image on top of another image, but if it's an adjustment, it will affect whatever's underneath, but not whatever's on the top, okay? It might not make sense right now, but it will make sense in a little bit. So the first thing I want to cover is this one, okay? The brightness and contrast adjustment layer. And you basically, it's really simple. Brightness, the one on top, and then this one adjusts contrast, okay? I really don't use this at all. It's kind of limiting of what you can really do. It's very simple, but I will show you other ways that it will work better, okay? So I just want to point it out. This is just one thing that you can do. You can hit auto and it will try to automate it. I don't recommend that you do that. I want you guys to really be able to edit your own pictures and not rely on automatic adjustments. That could be a good starting point, so that way you can see what it might be good, but I don't rely on automatic adjustments. I just don't trust them. So that's basically the first one. Pretty easy. Now, this right here, it behaves the same as any other layer. You can delete it by pressing the delete key. You can drag it to the trash can right here. Okay, that's something else that you can do. And basically you can copy it. You can do anything you want with that layer. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so our next one is going to be another one right here on the same row. We're going to go like that down. Okay, so we're going to go to levels. Okay, so this one right here, it gives you a little bit more of adjustments that you can do. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of these right now. So it's pretty basic, even though you can do more. You have this graph right here that I already explained what it is. That's the histogram. Okay, so this is basically like the x-ray of your image. Okay, so the right side are the very bright or highlights. These are basically the whites, all the way with the white. to highlights, to midtones, to shadows, to black. Okay, so if you want more contrast, for example, you compress this image right here. You can see like in the middle of the image, it just blows out that brightness right there. So those are the highlights. These are the shadows. Okay, you're making all the contrast really high if you do that, right? If you press this image right here, and then the midtones are right here. Okay, so these are the midtones. So I can make that brighter, okay, to make it more visible, okay, or make it darker this way. So here you have a little bit more control, right? Than the other one that was just like one slider. Here you can actually compress it this way, but basically it gives you the same thing, the contrast, or the midtones, get them higher by brightening up the picture, okay? Now it gives you also this little eyedroppers. I'm going to explain that later on. In this tool, they work okay, but I think in curves, it works a little bit better and you have more flexibility on what you can do. Okay. And then you have the same here if you want to like compress and take away the blacks or minimize the blacks or take away of the whites. Okay. And become like more detail. Okay. So here, this is a great way of looking at how the image is created. You have from 0, which is black, to 255, which is pure white. So RGB images, when we look at it in Photoshop, they are all composed from this. Okay, so it goes from 0, which means pure black, like no detail there at all. It's just black. Okay, to 255, which is also the same, no detail but completely white. Okay, so everything in between here are the different levels. So you can compress that by pushing this down. So you're telling like nothing will be pure white. It will be a little bit, gray white here. So that would be like 243. In theory, most of the time I recommend like if you want some detail on the whites, then you do 240 or 249 or less. Okay. And for the blacks, 5 or a little bit more. That's if you want to take away some of the contrast. So that way there is a little bit of detail on the dark areas of your image. I'll explain that later. Not a big deal, but this is a great way of emphasizing how the images are created in terms of lightness, which goes from 0 to 255. So that's the levels. It can be really useful. It's simple to use. I don't use it again that much because the one that goes next is the one that I'm going to use. So I'm going to drag this to the trash can also a different way. Okay, now this one right here is the curves. This one I feel like is the most useful because it's the most versatile. It gives you a lot more control and there's a lot more little tricks that you can do with this one. So it might be scary at first. So I'm hopefully will make it less scary. And the reason it looks scary is because it's like a weird graph and you have this line and it seems like you have so many options, but it's pretty simple to use. It's basically the same as the other one. Just imagine that this line is down right here. Imagine that that's down for a second. Okay. And you have the blacks, which are right here. And you have the whites, which are all the way right here. This line is basically that same graph, right? But it's right diagonally right here. Okay. So that should make it a little bit more clear. So what that means is that this is pure white. This is pure black. These are the midtones. These are the highlights. These are the shadows. The shadows. Sorry. So if you want to make the overall image brighter, you can just click here on the middle and just pull it up, and it will make the image brighter. Okay. Now, if you want to make the highlights darker, then you click here and you bring it down. Okay. The cool thing about the curves is that you can keep adding points. Okay. For example, if I want to make the shadows darker, I click here and then I pull it down. Okay. And then that way it makes it darker. Okay, if I want to take away some of the detail on the white or make some more detail on the white, I can bring this down. Now you have to be careful because you can start getting crazy and doing like a weird graph and a curve, and you will see that your image will start looking really weird. So just be careful about that. One thing that I want to point out, most of these, I think all of these have this little symbol right here that you can revert, okay, to the original settings if you want to do that. And the visibility is if you want to hide it so you can see the before and after. Okay. So that's something that will be really useful. I do those a lot, and you have the clipping mask here. I will explain that more later. We're not quite there yet, but the overall thing is learning how this works. If you pull it up, it will brighten it up. If you pull it down, it will darken it up. Okay. Now, if that's too much and it's confusing, I just didn't explain that. I should explain that. Another way that you can delete these dots, if you click and drag it out, they will go away. Okay, so you can delete dot by dot if you want to do that. Sometimes I put a couple of dots and then I realize I I want to take one out. Let's say I do something like that and I realize, oh, I don't want that one. I can just pull it out like that. Okay. But the thing that I wanted to mention to you is, if this is too confusing, you have this awesome tool right here. It looks like a hand and it has an arrow down or up. If you select that tool, you can go to an area of the image that you want to make brighter. And I'm not clicking, I'm just hovering on top of it. You can see on that graph a circle, right? And it's letting you know where that area is in that graph. So if I go here, it shows you that's there. If I go to this area here, you can see that's above that graph. So it kind of changes depending on where you are. So let's say that I want to make this wall a little bit brighter. I can go to this area, click and drag it up, and then it will make it brighter. Okay. And it's going to make that brighter, but you'll see that it makes everything else brighter. So if you don't want to affect the other area, you can just click here and then bring it down. Now it's only affecting this area and not affecting the highlights here. So that's why this tool is really powerful, the curves. You can have many dots and modify how it's affecting your image really carefully, okay, compared to the other ones. So my suggestion is play with this tool, see what you like and how you can use it. My suggestion is that you start using this adjustment right here where you have the hand, so that way you get a feel of how you can do it. But you have to be careful, because if you start like clicking areas and doing stuff, it's just going to go crazy really quickly. I usually suggest that you start with 3 points only. And usually what you want to do is, if you want to add contrast, you click here and drag it up, and then you click here and you drag it down. The reason is you add contrast by darkening the shadows and making the highlights, okay, brighter. If you want to do the opposite and take away contrast, then you lower the highlights, okay, and then raise the shadows, and it's taking away contrast. And now you can see there's more detail here and lowering the highlights on this area. And this image actually needed that. It needed like less contrast, so you can actually see, the hallway a little bit more. If we want to see the difference, look at that, right? Kind of needed a little bit less contrast. So that's what this tool is, and you want to make sure that you click here and then test around. If you want to just basically make your image brighter, you can just click on the middle and then pull it up, and it's going to kind of like affect everything, because you can see that everything comes up. So you can just do that, click on the middle and pull it up. Okay. If you want contrast, then you click here and bring it down. Okay. And that creates more contrast. So that's basically the curves. I'm going to go over it again later on. But I want to give you a little introduction of what you can do. Something else that you can do on this one, and that's a little bit more advanced. I actually fixed the colors also on this slider right here where it says RGB, not a slider, the menu. You can change it to, for example, red, and you can add more red or take away red. Okay. So you can actually color correct your images also under the same panel, which is really helpful because it saves you some time. And since it has so many like options, you can actually fix it really well. Now, let me give you a trick. I usually do 2 curves, one for adjusting the density or the brightness of your image and the contrast, and another one just to affect the color. And I'll explain later on when we go into more advanced photo editing why I do that. And there's a very simple reason that it will make a lot of sense later on. But for now, I just want to show you what you can do with this. You can actually go here and lower the greens, and you can make like cool effects within the same panel. Okay. So that's the curves. If you don't understood it completely, don't worry. I'm going to keep talking about it, and it's going to keep popping up because we're going to keep working on images. So today is kind of like an overview. So that's that one. I'm going to delete it by selecting the layer and pressing delete. So I did that. Now let's go to a couple more up here. Exposure. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker. The exposure is very simple. Basically, it's, this is basically like the one that you get when you're editing raw. But it doesn't work as well. I don't know if you remember, when you push on the raw, you still preserve the detail. Look at how quickly this gets blown out. And it's only like at +2. I really don't find this tool that useful because I feel like it's just too quickly gets the image damaged. Like that exposure slider just like blows up things really quickly. So, I as I mentioned, I'll tell you which one is my favorite, which is the curves, but I will show you the other ones just so you can get a sense of what they do. Okay. And there might be moments that you want to use some of these tools. This one has like gamma corrections and offset, which can be useful. But I basically, all these things, you can do them with the curves and you have more control than just a slider. Okay. Um, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of that. So let's reset that. I just did a awful image adjustment there. Now let's delete that one right there. And let's open another image so that way we get, let's go back to Bridge and let's open something else so we can play around a little bit. Let's do this one because we're going to do some black and white adjustments in a little bit, and I think this will be interesting. Okay, so that was the exposure. Vibrance, very basic, kind of basically enhancing the low tones of the image to make them more saturated, or make them more vibrant. I don't know if you can tell. Let's look at the before and after. So that was before, so you can see how deep the blue becomes in the sky and even on the plants and the rock. So it takes the tones that are, more mid-tones and like kind of like saturates them a little bit and enhances them. So that's what the vibrance does. Saturation basically actually saturates all the colors in your image. So it looks a lot more artificial, like really fake. You see that yellow there. So that's what the vibrant does. Really simple stuff. You already know how to do that in Camera Raw, so I'm going to skip that one. Now, hue and saturation, also similar. You have the hue, which you can, make like an interesting effect on your image, making it look like purple. That actually doesn't look that bad. It looks kind of psychedelic, huh? So you can play around with this one, and find like an interesting, effect if you want to do that. I don't use it that much, but one thing I do use sometimes is I go to a specific color. Let's say that you have someone with a red shirt and it's just super saturated and distracting. You can actually go to the reds here and just desaturate that color. Okay. Right now I did that, but let's go to one that is not. Let's revert this. Let's go to blue so we can do the sky. It will be more noticeable. So I go to blues. If I desaturate it, you will see that the sky becomes more desaturated. So you can actually very specifically lower the saturation of some colors. And if you see this slider right here, you can like make bigger the gamma of color that is desaturating. So if I make this bigger, you can see like now it really became gray. So you can play around with that. And you can make it like even bigger if you want to get more colors in that desaturation. So that's kind of cool because you can desaturate specific colors. It's not like when you're doing it in Camera Raw where you just lower the saturation, it desaturates everything. Here you can actually do it by channels of color that you want to desaturate, which is pretty fun. Okay, so that's basically saturation. You have lightness right there that it can also affect the lightness of that specific color. Right now I'm the blue, so I can actually darken the sky if I want it only. So if I reset this and I'm on blues and I do this, I can actually make, if I desaturate that blue and make it darker. Oh, but I'm in the master. That's why I did that. Let's go to blues again. There you go. So you can see how it kind of like, darkens a little bit, that sky. So that's something that you can do with the hue and saturation that most people don't know how to do. Most people just saturate it and desaturate, but they don't realize that you have the hue and the different channels here that you can play with. So that's that one. Sorry if it's quickly. Remember, we're going to go back over these. It's just like an overview. I'm going to delete that one. Color balance is basically to adjust your colors. You have here something that's really useful so you can see what are the opposites. I talked about in the class already that images, when they're projected or when they're on a screen, they're made out of red, green, and blue. Okay, the opposite of red, green, and blue, the right here is cyan, magenta, and yellow. So if I want to take away red, then you have to add cyan. Okay, if you want to add green, right, you go this way. So magenta is the opposite way. So the same if you go that way. So basically, you want to add the opposite color if you want to take that one away. So if I want to, take away yellow, then you add blue. If I want to take away, magenta, then I add green, or vice versa. Okay, so that's how you basically color correct your images. This one is pretty simple to use, but if you have a shift on a color, let's say you shot and it looks really blue or cyan, then you can add red and it will fix the color issue that you have. I will show you some tricks on how to color correct later on. This is just so you can understand how the tool works. So I'm going to delete this one. Okay. Now we go to black and white. So as soon as you click on the black and white symbol right here, which is the middle one right here, remember the middle row is mostly about color effects. So black and white is kind of there because it's taking away the color. Um, so once you do this and you add the black and white, you have this slider which have the different channels, right, to make your image. The cool thing about this is that you can actually affect the color, and it will darken or brighten it up that color. So if I go, for example, to the blues, I can actually make the sky only darker, which is pretty cool because you can make like a dramatic, sky. It used to be that you had to get a polarizer or a red filter, when you were shooting the sky, to kind of like make a sky look really black. But here it's just so easy to just, move that slider down. Now, if you don't remember what color it is, if you just click on this little hand, you can actually click on the image and it will tell you what color that is. Well, that was not that helpful. There we go. So that picked the yellow, and you can see that I can make that tree darker or brighter. Okay. So you can play around. The same thing I can do with the sky. Once you have that hand selected, you can go to the sky and it will identify what color it is, and then you can click and drag. Okay. Right now I'm click and I drag. I'm not letting it go. I'm just dragging one way to make it darker and then the other way to make it brighter. Okay. So that's how this tool works, and it has to be selected. If you unselect it, then it won't work. Okay. You have to make sure that you click here and then you go to the image, click and drag. You can make it darker or brighter. Okay, so that's really cool. That's a really useful tool. It used to be that Photoshop, you had to make your images black and white using the channels, but when they came out with this black and white option, it just opened up so many possibilities and make things way easier to get a good black and white image. So I hope that you guys play a little bit with this because it's pretty useful. So that is the black and white. I'm going to click on the layer, press delete on my keyboard to delete it. Because one thing I want to point out, every time you click on one of these, I'm going to do that right now. Boom, boom, boom. Every time you click, it's going to keep adding layers and layers of adjustment. You don't want to end up with a crazy amount of layers by just clicking. Every time, if you're just testing, that's totally fine. Test, but once you do that, you just press delete on your keyboard and delete them, because if not, you're going to end up with a messy layers panel with a bunch of layers, and then you're not going to know what's doing what. Okay, so keep your layers organized. Remember, always name them, so that way you know what it's doing. And if it's not doing anything, it should not be in the layers panel. Every layer that's in your panel should be doing something. If you just have a blank layer there, empty, or an adjustment that is not doing anything, that's not good. It's just taking space on your hard drive, and it's also confusing you because then you have layers that you shouldn't have there. Okay, so try to keep it clean and organized, and that's why every time I do one, I delete it right away after I'm done with it. Okay, so that was black and white. Photo filter is also kind of self-explanatory. You have here a color that you can pick from. So if I pick color and I click here, you can do any of these colors. Now, to explain this graph, if you go up high, you have a bunch of different options of color, and you see this square right here then gives you like tones within that color range. Okay, so you first have to slide this. For example, if I want to do red, I have to go all the way to the top and I leave it there. Once I do that, then I can pick any of this. I can do it like kind of grayish looking, or really saturated all the way to the top, or darker if I go lower. And let's say I want to let's do like a sepia kind of tone, like a brownish. Okay, so there. So once you add that and you have your color, then you can decide how much density you want into that color. So now it's like more noticeable, right? That tone. So that is if you want to do a custom one. You can also do like a filter and just pick from this list. Like if I want yellow, sepia actually is here, so you can pick sepia, which is really similar to the color that I picked. And you can basically move this slider of how much amount you want. Okay, so that's pretty cool because you can make your own custom one, or you can pick from the drop down menu filter, okay, like a cooling filter, and it will look like that. Okay, all right, so that's the photo filter. I'm going to press delete and delete that one. Now this one is a channel mixer. I'm not going to go over this one, but this used to be the way that you did black and white, and the idea was that you wanted these three amounts to give you 100 on the bottom. So you first, make it monochromatic, and then these three, you see 40, 40, 20 gives you 100. So depending on the combination that you pick, it will give you a different effect. So this was a little bit more tedious than doing the normal black and white now. But it worked in a similar way. It's just that it will take you longer to get the desired results that you wanted. So that's why I'm not going to even go over it right now. There are some techniques that you can use this tool still, and it's helpful. But for now, I'm not going to focus on it because it's way simpler to just do the black and white the other way. So I'm not going to go over that. Color lookup, I'm not going to go over that. We're going to go over that later. Invert is kind of self-explanatory. If you click on it, it will literally invert your image. All the colors, it's going to be the opposite. So it's more like an effect. So these ones are effects. So I'm not going to go over them too much. You have posterize, also another effect that you can do. And if you move it here, we'll have, different amounts. So that's that one. Threshold, I'm going to show you guys how to use this later for editing your images, even though it doesn't make sense right now because it looks kind of weird, but it is helpful for some editing techniques. So I'll show you that later. Then we have selective color, can be also really useful for editing your photographs. You can basically select a color and adjust it here. One of the things that I do a lot is I go to blacks and then add more black, or if the image needs it, or take away some black. Okay, so that's something I will show you later on when we're editing more advanced images. So gradient map, that's, I'll go over that, but basically it picks two colors and it can be kind of cool, actually. That looks kind of interesting. And you can customize what colors you want to do. Okay. So you can do like any color combination. Right now it's just doing, like a blue to white. But you can click there on that graph, and then you can click on these, and you can change it to any other color you want. Okay. But I'm going to go over that later because that's a little bit more advanced. But it's a cool effect. And the main thing I want to point out is that every time you click on one of these, it's going to create a new adjustment. Okay. For now, I want you to focus on the basics ones. Okay. I'm going to give you a lab where you're going to basically edit some images. Okay. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do on them. Of course, you're going to have to use one of the adjustments from the top. So you have to use one of these, okay, where you have to edit your image. I'm going to recommend that you all do the curves from now on, but it's really up to you. I'm not going to, be looking at, oh, you didn't use the curve, that's the one that you should be using. I'm going to tell you that is the best one. So if you really want to do good editing your photographs, you should be using that one. But you can use any of these, okay, and I'm going to give you a file where you're going to edit it using what I just showed you right now. Then you're going to use another one where you're going to make it black and white. Okay. And then you're going to do one where you add a filter. And I'm going to skip the effect. Okay. So I'm going to give you three of them. So one where you use the curves, one where you make it black and white, and then one where you put a filter effect. Okay. So that way I get a sense that you know how to do that. So that's basically it. I went kind of quickly. But you remember, you can always go back on the video and pause and see how I did it. But this is like what I've said since the beginning. The more you do it, the more it will make sense. I can be here talking all day, but if you don't actually use the tool, you will not learn how to do it. So when you open an image, the good thing is that these are not your images. You're basically mutilating my images, and you can make them really crazy and look, oh, that looks really bad. But the cool thing about adjustments is that they're non-destructive. So if I make the image really black right here like that, or dark, not black, I'm going to pull this out so you can see it better. That's above my layer. Okay. So I can always hide the visibility, and it's not really doing anything to the actual image. It's basically non-destructive. Okay. It's just above it, affecting how we see it, but it's not really applying it directly to the image. Okay. So that's why we like the adjustments layers, because they're a layer above. Okay. So once you do that, right, you have two options. You edited your images. What do you do? As soon as you edit your images, you're going to save it as a PSD file, because right now it has layers. So if you go to File, Save As, automatically it's going to recognize that it has layers. So it's going to say Photoshop under the format right here at the bottom. Okay. So right here it says Photoshop. If you change it to JPEG, you'll see that it has an exclamation mark because you haven't flattened it. So you have to always save your file twice. Okay. One with the layers as a PSD, And then after you do that, then you can go right here and then go to flatten image. Once you do that, it will compress your image. Now you can resize it for web if it's going to be for web, or for print if it's going to be for print. So you go to image, image size. Remember, the shortcut is Option Command I. And now here I can go to pixels. Let's put 1000. Oh, actually, it's on the height, the longest one. It's always 1000 on the longest side. Remember that. And then make sure that's 72. So I press OK. Right, so that's my small file size, and that's the one that I'm going to go File, Save As, and you're going to save it for the web. Okay, so remember, twice, one as a Photoshop file and one as a web file. Okay, later on, if you want to print it, you can always go to that PSD file, which is still a big printable file, and you can resize it to the dimensions that you need, like an 8 by 10, or if you want to give it to somebody as 11 by 16, or sorry, it's 16 by 20 or something like that. You can do that because it's a big file. Okay, you don't want to go back to your file and be like, oh, so excited, I'm going to print this, but then you realize that you have a 1000 pixels image file size. Okay, so I hope that that was clear enough, even though I went quick. But remember, you can pause it. If you have questions, just let me know. I want you to start to learn how to edit your images here with the adjustments. But if you have questions that are more advanced, don't worry, we're going to go over that later on. But for now, I just need you to understand how layers work and how the adjustments layer work, because then later on we're going to start combining them, making masks. So it's going to start getting a lot more advanced. So you definitely need to understand how these work before we dive into a little bit deeper. Okay, so I'll see you soon. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch up soon.